p.m. right now. Joel?
Thanks, Rich. In accordance with the provisions of Section 10:4-8D of the Open Public Meetings Act, the date, location, and time of the commencement of this meeting is reflected in a meeting notice, a copy of which schedule has been filed with the village manager and the village clerk, the Ridgewood News and the Record newspapers, and posted on the bulletin board in the entry lobby of the village municipal offices at 131 North Maple Avenue and on the village website, all in accordance with the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Please stand for the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, Michael.
Mayor Knudsen.
Here.
Councilman Voigt.
Here.
Ms. Altano. Mr. Joel.
Here.
Ms. Patiri. Mr. Scheibner.
Here.
Mr. Torrielli.
Here.
Ms. McWilliams.
Here.
Ms. Bartow. Chief Van Gore.
Okay, thanks, Michael. All right, our first item will be public comments on topics not pending before the board. Do we have anyone that wants to approach? Okay, seeing that there's none, we'll move on to our next item. Committee, commission, and professional updates for non-agenda topics. Am I right?
I'll go first then. Oh, do you want to go first, Joel?
Okay.
Okay. All right. Let me just pull this up. Hang on. Okay. So Historic Preservation Commission, Isabella Altano is not here this evening, so I'm just going to give this report. HPC met last Thursday evening. Among the applications was the application for variance relief on a minor subdivision for 246 Mountain Avenue. The applicant, Bob Jenny, along with his attorney, appeared and went over the components of the application and the specifics to the subdivision and the C variance being requested. There was a discussion and comments from the public. One member of the public commented that he felt that if the application were approved, it would undermine a historic streetscape and was against the proposed subdivision. That was Martin Walker from 114, it's actually Cottage Place. And another area resident, Mr. James Dabney, also commented not only was he against the application, but said it should not be approved as it would not preserve the historic quality of the neighborhood. Mr. Dabney also offered information regarding the back in the late 70s, early 80s, there were a lot of properties that were subdivided, and in fact the zoning was put into place in order to prevent further subdivisions. In any event, Lynn Brady made a motion to reject this application, even though the Historic Preservation Commission only comments, but they rejected the idea that this application should move forward and will make comment in not supporting it, and that was a unanimous with the exception of Mr. Tony Damiano, who recused himself on that application. So it was motioned by Lynn Brady and seconded by Tess Giuliani. So that's where we're at. Presumably we're going to get a letter from Joe Saplicki or someone to that effect, because I know Vince Perillo, our chairman, was out of the country, and Vice Chairman Saplicki was in. So we anticipate a letter to the board.
I can check with him.
Or just a memo to that effect with the vote, with the comments, because technically it's not a vote, it's a comment, but we always kind of grapple with that piece. That's it, and that was the only thing I have to offer.
Okay, thanks. Okay, and to my left.
Yep. I'd like to just give a brief accounting of the latest master plan subcommittee meeting. We met this evening at 6 p.m. right before this meeting. We were joined by Bridget Bogart, our planner, and she helped to walk us through kind of the steps to get from where we are now to adopting a new master plan. There's a couple of action items from tonight. Now, we can walk through those steps briefly if we'd like when I'm done, but there's a couple of action items One for Chris Rudishauser. We'd like to send out an RFQ for a planner to assist the planning board in preparing a new master plan, but with the exception of the visioning process and the visioning plan. We'd like that to be separate from the RFQ. So if you want, I can walk you guys through what we talked about briefly, but I don't want to take a lot of time, but what Brigitte talked about, this could be at least a year, likely maybe 2-year process to get from where we are now to actually adopting a new master plan or master plan reexamination. We'd start with a visioning process, and then from that we would develop a visioning plan. That's where we engage the public, any interested parties in letting us know what they want to see out of the village. From there, we'd look at the elements, the 2 required elements and the 10 optional elements, which ones we actually want to address. Then we'd work on those as a subcommittee based on the visioning plan and present those in pieces to the planning board, and the public would be involved in all that. And after we have all the elements resolved, we draft it, we have a public hearing, and then we'd finalize it and basically file it with the county. There's a few more steps in there, but that's kind of an overview of how we're going to get from where we are now to the master plan being fully re-examined, but the first step is the RFQ going out. So if Chris could help us with that, it'd be most appreciated.
Yeah, I'll use with the standard template I have, but if you have any thoughts or specifics you'd like to be included to help separate various respondents to what you want, let me know. Or if there's any particular topics you want covered that a responder would need to know so they could price it accordingly, again, let me know, please.
Okay. So maybe we talked about some ideas at the meeting, maybe we'll pass around some notes and then send it over to Chris this week or something about seeing examples of their work, things of that nature, but we can give you a comprehensive list.
And if you need any assistance, we will send.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Anyone have any questions on that? I thought that was a nice rundown for that, so it's moving along. Next item, any correspondence received by the board, Michael?
Yes, we received an email from a Michael Riley regarding questioning about a residence at 315 East Glen and if it was in a historic district, and an email from an R.B. Halvey. That's it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Michael. All right. Our next item will be the KS Broad Street preliminary and final major site plan, 76 and 80 Chestnut Street and 25 through 27 Franklin Avenue, Block 2005, lots 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, adoption of memorializing resolution of approval. We received a resolution that was previously emailed, and there's hard copies at each of your seats. Take a minute just to go through it, and then we'll discuss it. Okay, this resolution's been a product of back and forth between the applicant, council, planner, engineer. So this should represent everything in it. Do we have any comments on it? I'll start down on this end. Jeff, do you have any?
Yeah, just a couple. Page 6, the bottom. Applicant found that providing a street wall on Franklin Ave. Oh, what's a street wall?
Where is that, Jeff? On where?
Bottom of page 6.
Or what item?
C. Applicant found that providing a street wall on Franklin Ave was a key element. What's a street wall? Oh.
Or at the top of page
It's
6.
the last, oh, actually, it's right in the middle. It's the middle paragraph, middle sentence. Applicant found that providing a street wall on Franklin Ave was a key element of its architectural design. What's a street wall?
Yes. Just for the record, Jason Tuvell for KS Broad. Yeah, sure. Hold on. Let me just take a look at the language that Councilman Boyd just was referencing. Yeah, because we comply with the setback requirement of bringing the building directly at the 0-foot setback. So that's what I believe it's indicating. And that was the testimony that I believe Dave Nicholson provided at the hearing. So it's just another way of saying we comply with the setback, which is 0 feet at the property line. That's all. Sorry, it's
Okay.
it should just say that. But
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's true. A street wall, it's also a design term that people use to represent a building that aligns the street to try to enclose the view and the feeling is for pedestrians in particular. So it's a design term to indicate a building, as the applicant indicated, a building that's close to the sidewalk in this case.
Okay, thank you. Page 13, item number 11A. Just want to make sure that it says applicant agrees to work with the planning board on sanitary sewer lines and making sure that they're adequate capacity. I'm assuming if they're inadequate capacity, they are not adequate capacity, there will be some sort of sit down to understand how to resolve that?
if there is no adequate capacity, we'll have to figure out how there is, or we'll have to amend the plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Correct.
Got it. And then just a gender identification. Item 14, Dana Glazer is a he, not a she. So if you fix that.
Which one was that, Councilman Boyd?
It's item 14 on page 14. Hey. You did? Oh, my God.
That was fixed.
On the copy we have here, it says,
I looked at the old copy, sorry. All right, that's it. Yeah, okay.
Dave, do you have any comments on it? Susan?
I just wanted to confirm, there were a lot of revisions on this, so I just wanted to confirm those gradings on the intersections, that is what was, let me just say, that the no-build conditions, the intersection of Franklin and Broad operate a level of C or better, level of D or better during PM, and Saturdays the northbound left from Broad Street operates at a level of E, and that based on the calculations, the improvements associated will operate at a level of service A. I just wanted to confirm that was the testimony that...
Mayor, yes. I had the same, I was a little confused.
I'm
I looked at the record and I went right to the source and I went to our traffic engineer, and you confirmed that is Mr. Duval, any comments on it?
No, I took everything directly from the transcripts and the traffic report, and I believe Shropshire Associates did review the resolution and indicated that everything was, yeah, was acceptable.
Okay. I just have to wait for the big yellow flag, hang on. Okay, why don't we just work our way that way
Yeah, sure.
until I find my...
Melanie, did you have any?
I have so many. No, I'm good for now. Thank you.
Okay, Joel?
No comments.
Okay, I don't have any either. Give you a few minutes.
Just a quick comment. I had set the original draft out on Friday because I know, obviously, the board
And I tried to get the substance out of as much ability to read the reso as possible before tonight's meeting. The changes that occurred since then are very minor. One was a series of paragraphs today, which was the last, they were just misnumbered. And we got final comments after initial comments from the planner. And I think the final comment was a word. So the reason why there was a series, and I got to thank Michael for bearing with me and getting that out, but I know if I was a board member, I'd like to get it with as much time as possible. It is a 21-page, 22-page document, so that's why if there was a little bit of a revisions. And I did outline each of the revisions as they occurred, so hopefully that was easy reading. Mr. Boyd, that worked out.
Okay. All right, seeing that there's no revisions on it, do we have a motion to approve the resolution?
Can I ask one quick question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
To Jeff's point about the on-site sanitary sewer lines, I mean, that obviously, it doesn't necessarily mean on the actual site. It would mean any of the sewer lines feeding in the direct vicinity of, correct? I mean, if I'm not mistaken, those are the ones that we actually have the issue with.
I believe that is an item that I had suggested a correction to the board council, that the only ones of concern are the ones in Franklin Avenue.
Like leading in, not
Yes.
actually on the
We
site.
really don't care what's on the property, they have to get it to the main. Village ordinance requires the property owner to be responsible for their laterals from the main to wherever they need them in their structure. So the obligation for proper conveyance to the main is that of the applicant.
Okay, so that, in your opinion, does that need to be noted in here differently than it is?
I believe I made some suggested language to Chris.
Yes, and that was included in, not only, Ms. McWilliams did it say line, but if the lining of the sewer line is not sufficient, then there has to be further activity performed by the applicant to the satisfaction of the village engineer.
I think we also had a correction on the word.
On-site.
No, there was also wording on sleeving.
Okay.
Sleeving, yes.
And I made suggestions on changing that language to more reflect what may need to be done with the line in Franklin Avenue, should it be necessary.
Do we need to take out the wording on-site in here?
I would want to keep, I put on-site because it's 100% the responsibility of the applicant, and I wanted that set forth.
Okay.
Yeah, and Melanie, I say this with all due respect, just because I want to make sure we're doing everything procedurally correctly. Because you voted no on the application, you can't vote on the resolution. I think that just, I have no problems with you commenting, but you can't vote on the resolution.
But yeah, I think the comments were excellent.
Yeah, no, the comments are
but
fine.
Technically, we're not there yet, but you're right.
Yeah, okay.
Mr. Rotshauser, there was a, just the sanitary or the sewer hookup, do we need to use that somewhere in the reso, or would the general conditions as to any fees and expenses related to utilities be satisfactory? Jason knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I believe each unit pays a specific fee.
Whatever's required by the ordinance. I mean, that's, I think we have a catch-all in here that we're required to, abide by any and all applicable ordinances that may govern the site in terms of other approvals other than the planning board, so
Right, and
that's
I think
fine.
each unit initially has to pay a fee, that's...
Yes, the village has an ordinance for a connection fee of $5,000 per
unit.
dwelling unit. There is also an additional connection fee for commercial space. It's $5,000 for the first 6,000 square feet, and then usually an additional 50 cents a square foot above 6,000 square feet.
And again, if those fees are not paid, the building cannot be occupied.
No CO.
Yeah, typically, you pay the connection fee even before you get a building permit
And then just in
from
terms
the
of,
utility.
in terms of just the water connection, that, because you would have to have the availability of water through DEP, right? So is that the DEP line?
That would be all, state, federal,
So it's the DEP that,
county, it has to just be in compliance with the lines are properly adhering to.
We're going to need to get a TWA permit on this project from the DEP. for the sanitary sewer. I don't know, Chris, if we're going to need anything from them on water, but
I don't know about water, that would be up to the water department, but yes, you do need a TWA based on the anticipated flow volume discharged. You'll submit that to my office, I'll review it, I'll sign it on behalf of the facility, and then you'll submit it to DEP.
Okay, so I wanted to go over number 8. It just states applicant will comply with any and all requirements of Ridgewood Water Company. And obviously that would be also the availability of water, though. How does that work?
I believe that was covered, maybe I'm wrong, but it was covered in the testimony by the village engineer. Again, nothing wrong with your professionals, Jason, but I keep relying on the
No, that's fine.
village professionals.
that's fine.
That there was a determination that there would be sufficient water capacity for the property, both in and out.
Yeah, I believe the Ridgewood Water Company had issued a will serve letter to the applicant when they had requested it. It should be as part of the file.
I guess that's what we just want to
You
confirm.
should be advised that at least a couple months ago, the DEP was talking with the water utility about lowering their total capacity. So there may be an issue with that.
So I guess that's my question, is how in this document, and thank you, because that's an important piece, and so there's a will serve letter, there could be a question with whether or not the capacity, so where in this document does it state that everything is pending also that capacity piece?
Chris, I would say, to answer the mayor's question on that, we have like every other resolution that's adopted, we have a catch-all in here that the applicant, as with Chris's office, worked on, that requires us to get approvals from any and all governmental agencies. That includes water departments, sewer departments. So if a water company comes back to us and says there's an issue, we got to address it. We can't get around that.
Okay, which is the same
Paragraph
then?
5 is good too, but also, looking in a crystal ball, the board has to rely upon the decision-making as the capacity is now, and that's why I believe the village engineer investigated that with the water department. David, is that your understanding? Because we do have a person with a little background.
Yeah, that is correct.
Plus, if you can't get water, you can't get a CO, I would assume.
No, I just want to make sure,
want to
make sure that we're clear on that, because I know that the will serve letter is relevant in that, but I also just want to make sure that the capacity is there, and so to what
I haven't
Dave is
seen
saying.
the will serve letter, but I imagine there's a caveat in there.
Yeah, and we'll work with Chris's office on
Okay,
that
all
issue.
good.
Okay. All right, so do we have a motion to approve the resolution?
Motion to approve.
Okay, Jeff moved the motion to approve the resolution as written. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, Joel seconded the motion. So it's to approve the resolution as written that we just reviewed. Michael, can you call the roll? And if you say yes, means you're approving it. And Melanie's not eligible to vote on this, so it was only the persons that are present and that voted in favor of this application.
Mayor Knudsen,
Yes.
Mr. Scheidner,
Yes.
Councilman Boyd,
Yes.
Mr. Torrielli,
Yes.
Mr. Joel,
Yes.
Thank you very much. And Chris, thanks to you specifically in your office and the village's professionals for working with us on the resolution, getting it done. I really appreciate it. Okay. Hope to see everybody again soon. Take care.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
thank you.
Jason? Okay, good.
Mr. Chair, that was 5-0.
What's that?
Was that 5-0?
What do you mean 5-0? Yeah, 5-0 is the vote, yeah. Mr. Brunich, will you be ready at this point? Okay. All right, our next item will be 257 Ridgewood Avenue LLC, Block 3703, Lot 46, and 8.01 preliminary and final major site plan. Public hearing continued from July 18, 2017. We previously heard this matter on July 18th, where we heard testimony from Mike Dipple, the engineer. Mr. Brunich is the attorney on the application. So, Mr. Brunich, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Joel.
Subsequent to the hearing, the applicant filed with the village revised plans, revised site plans, and revised architecturals. Those plans were, those revisions were primarily occasioned as a consequence of meetings with the village planner and the village engineer, and as well the comments made by board members at the last hearing. And so Ms. McManus was kind enough to review the revisions and in a very timely way yesterday provided us with a second review letter. Actually, it's a copy of a letter I think was addressed to the board. So in order to have a logical, if you will, flowing record and to keep this matter understandable, what I propose is that we bring Mr. Dipple back, address the issues of the revisions, and as he does so, he will comment with some specificity on the points raised and or made by Ms. McManus in her second review letter, so that we can have it clear that the applicant has been responsive. I'll state from the outset that for the most part, Ms. McManus has, and we're grateful for this review, as I said, in a very timely way, compliance with her comments and with the observations and suggestions of the planner and the engineer, although we haven't had a chance, since we just got the engineer's report this afternoon around 4:30, 4:45, we have no comment on the engineer's report this evening. So, Mr. Dipple is not only here, as we can see, setting up and ready to testify, but he's hopeful that he can get out of here quickly because he has another matter over in New Milford that requires him to give testimony. So with that,
Mr. Bridge,
yes, sir.
Your witness remains sworn and also you're qualified. In
Thank you.
terms of just the documents you referred to, I would just request that we mark Ms. McManus's report as Board 1.
That's fine.
I don't believe I've had a board exhibit. That's what I just looked through. I haven't had one yet, I don't believe.
I believe that's correct, Mr. Martin.
And then Board 2 was Mr. Rudishauser's report from today.
Yes.
And if there's any reference to them, we can refer to them as Board 1 and 2, okay?
Thank you very much. Mike will get to in a second. I wanted you to know that we have two other proposed witnesses for this evening. Tom Toronto from United Way of Bergen County is here this evening and will offer some testimony with respect to the special needs housing that the applicant proposes for the project. Assuming we move along rapidly enough, I'm hopeful that there'll be sufficient time to at least start the testimony from Menno and Waska, the architects for the project. Mr. Bruce Engelbaugh, who has the responsibility for the architectural work, is with us this evening as well. If that all works, on September 19th, we'll be back with Engelbaugh, move on with traffic, and then move on with Burgess and Associates. John Szabo is here this evening, but I suspect John will be testifying back in September. So that's our game plan, and with your kind cooperation, we'll move right along.
Just finally, with Mr. Keller's report received by the planning board on July 21st, we'll keep that until September 19th?
Yeah, I can state for the record that Keller has been in touch with John Jarr. I can't speak specifically as to the exchange of information and correspondence, but I know that they've been communicating, and hopefully we'll have some more from John Jarr and or from Keller. Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, Mike, even though Chris Martin has reminded you, I remind you once again, you are under oath, and you're here this evening on behalf of the applicant, 257RA. You have in your hand a number of copies of some plans that your office revised at the applicant's request. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The revision date is August 2nd, 2017. Revision number 3.
And those smaller versions, I call it, 11.5 by 17s. You're intending to hand those out to the board, I suppose. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Fine. Are they accurate copies of the revised plans that were filed by your office with the village?
Yeah, they're identical.
All right, fine. May we ask that they be handed to Mr. Caffarelli and distributed to the board for your convenience?
And you'll mark them?
Yeah, we can mark it, sure. Well, hold on here a second, if you would, please. We did some pre-marking last month, and I've run into some flack, if you will, from my staff in having kind of gotten ahead of ourselves. Some of the exhibits that were marked have in fact been revised, and what I'm speaking about, and I'll reference them very specifically in a second, there were 4 or 5 exhibits that were utilized by Mr. Dipple. They were exhibits, either his, and in 1 or 2 instances, the architect's plans. I propose, Mr. Martin, that we would, to the extent that there has been reference to exhibits that were pre-marked and got into the record at the July meeting, that we stick with the designation, okay? But the revised plans and the exhibits submitted this evening, I think, should be marked a little differently.
I agree 100%. So this latest handout is a revised plan?
It is a revised plan, and I would suggest that the plan itself should be marked as AR, applicant revised, and then whatever the number should be. It should be the plan.
Is this the site plan?
It is the site plan.
So I have A1 as the site plan. You want to mark this as AR1?
I would suggest that that's how I think it makes most sense.
Fine.
I think it'll read better, ultimately, when looking at a transcript, if we really have to do that.
Yeah, as long as both sides understand. AR1 is what we're going to mark now, okay?
Fine. Mike is marking it AR1. We can go through the formality to have the court reporter mark it as well at the appropriate time. Now, Mike, let's talk about AR1. What is it? And if you'd be kind enough to point out the changes that have been made.
Okay. AR1 is a full copy of the site plan set entitled Preliminary and Final Major Site Plan. It is revision number 3. The revision note is address planner's report comments of May 12, 2017, and other miscellaneous revisions. It is dated August 2nd, 2017. And it consists of 14 sheets, C01 through C14.
Okay. As I indicated earlier, these revisions come about as a consequence of comments made and received and dealt with received from the village planner. Can you point out the changes and point out specifically the comments of, or where and how these plans address the comments made by Ms. McManus?
Okay. So I'm going to start with sheet CO3, and that is entitled Ground Floor Site Plan. And if you refer to the smaller 11 by 17 copies, I think you can still see the red clouding of the changes, and we were careful to make sure we picked up all of the changes, I believe. So if you look at this ground floor site plan, and again, getting back to my testimony, this really only is the engineering for the ground level, which is accessible off of North Maple Avenue from the east side of the building. So it doesn't have all of the improvements shown, which are for the upper level, which is accessible off of Franklin Avenue. So a couple of the things that you can see on this level quickly are, I'm going to start over here on the left side, and we modified the tree planter sequence along North Maple Avenue, and that was one of the items that we discussed in the prior hearing, and we said that, we identified that there was one tree missing. There's an opportunity for another planter. There are 2 planters in front of the building now, the proposed building addition along North Maple. So we end up with a series of 5 street trees along the North Maple Avenue frontage. We've always had the municipal banding along, or the streetscape along the curb line, so that didn't change. We have a few things clouded, which are more like site distance and things like that were incidental to not only some of the comments, but also just some of the minor modifications that were made with the planters and the handicap ramps and things like that. Another major change that you can pick up on this sheet is the opportunity we discussed to have some kind of passive seating area in the northeast corner of the property, and we've done that. And what you see on this sheet, because it's just the site plan, the engineering, and the landscaping comes in later, but you can see a brick pattern here where we have an oval-shaped seating area accessible on 3 sides from the municipal right-of-way, from the entrance, the main entrance to the building, and also we added a sidewalk to a doorway which could access to the ground-level garage. So I can pick up on more improvements there, but that was one of the things that we discussed, that your planner presented in her letter, we discussed at a meeting, and it made it onto the plans. Another change was at this ground level, we moved one of the parking spaces. We had an opportunity to take out the very last parking space on the northeast corner of the ground level parking and move it over toward, I guess, the middle of the site near the 2 ADA accessible spaces, thereby allowing us a place to turn around, to perform a K-turn should someone come into that area and realize that, well, it's all full, so how do I get back out? So that was something that was discussed at the prior hearing, I think, extensively. So we addressed that by moving a space and just moving things very slightly in that area in order to accommodate that space. So also on this sheet, and again, it's kind of goes with the plan, but you'll see a number of clouded areas within the notes, and you're going to hear more from the architect, but the floor area ratio changed slightly. It's still compliant, but it changed slightly, and he's going to tell you how that happened. The recreational amenity was improved, and that changes on my zoning table. We identified a few of the zoning issues that were brought up or compliance items that were brought up by Ms. McManus. We added them to the plans. If you recall, I discussed the height of the building and how we calculated that, and we had a discussion after we submitted the plans last time with your planner. We've now added that. I think we've come to agreement on the height calculation, so we've added the height calculation to that. In our zoning table, we clarified that the special needs housing does require 2 spaces. I had testified that my plan showed 140 required. It's now 141, so there were 2 spaces. And, there's a few other waivers and variances that were brought up. A building signage table was added to the plans. You're going to hear more from that from the architect regarding building signage. So we show compliance with the code there. And then you'll notice a couple signs were added for right turn only, and that really moves me to the next sheet, which is CO4, which is the portion of the site that's accessible from Franklin Avenue. So now we're 1 level up again, and we're coming in off of Franklin Avenue where we're faced with this parking area, and then accessibility into the residential units, which are the upper floors. And I think the most notable change here is what we discussed, that we have right in, right out onto Franklin Avenue, and that was a point that we made in the hearing in July last time. So these signs are related to the change to the driveway. It's a pretty narrow driveway opening, but we were able to put a small island there and add the proper signage in order to accommodate only right in and right out. So there's not a lot of clouding on that sheet. When we move on to the grading, drainage, and utility plan, we added the average grade point locations. It was something that your planner had asked us to do, and that was an exhibit that I brought at last hearing. I think it was A5, and that showed how we calculated the height. A4, my apologies. So we added that to the plan. That was a last-minute change before the prior hearing, and that shows up on the plans. It carries over onto sheet C06, where we show those average grade point locations, as discussed and I believe agreed to with your planner as to how to accurately calculate the average grade. Moving on to C07, which is entitled Ground Floor Lighting and Landscaping Plan, we modified the lighting entirely. This is one point in your planner's letter that we haven't quite come to full agreement on yet. So lighting's tough. You put the lights up, you try not to get the spill, you try to pull them back a little bit. We have very little spillage of light onto neighboring properties. It essentially occurs in the rear, where we have two building-mounted fixtures trying to light this sidewalk that I discussed, going from the lower parking lot up to the upper level, up the stairs. And we get a little incidental lighting spillage over onto the municipal parking lot. So while we recognize that, we're trying to make sure that that's a safe area, because you're down in a walkway with a retaining wall on one side and a building on the other. So we're going to try to keep that well lit and to keep it at a height that those lights won't be vandalized. And that does end up with a little bit of spillage on the back side, at least at this level. And this is, again, I'm on the ground level now. I moved on to 07, which is the ground level. And one of the other improvements that you can see now, a little more clear, is the landscaping which is associated with that passive seating area along North Maple Avenue. We still have the ornamental trees. We added 2 benches, brick, sidewalk. We have a number of different plantings. They're listed here. And I believe, if I'm correct, I think your planner concurred that addresses that comment satisfactorily, and I think we're, we invite any comments or any criticism of that design, but I think we've provided something in the front. There are some other landscaping changes on this set of plans. We're using LED fixtures, getting back to the lighting. I'm sorry, I'm skipping around, but we're using LED fixtures, and we incorporated those. I think some of the fixtures we had on the prior plan, a little bit outdated, and may not be available in the way we had them on the plan anymore, because they carried over from the prior submission to the Board of Adjustment. So we updated that. Moving on to first floor lighting and landscaping plan. Some additional landscaping was added in the rear to shield the parking spaces. And again, we get a little bit of light spillage onto the funeral home parking area, and that's caused by these 2 lights which light this access way. We can work on that. It's very minimal. I see a 0.5, a 0.4, a couple of 0.2s, and that's an illumination level in foot candles on the ground surface. So I'm going to work with your planner on that going forward to try to maybe use even a lower wattage light. I'm going to stick with the height and try to reduce it a little bit. I still have to provide the safety for the people that are using these spaces, and that's where I kind of get into trouble there. I got to kind of get the front of the spaces to the right level, but 4 feet later, I got to keep it to a lower level. So I'm working on it. And that comment remains outstanding with your planner. And I think the rest of it is fairly just, details and soil erosion and sediment control. So I don't know if I've missed anything. Looking at your planner's review letter of...
Mr. Dipple, let me,
yes.
just so I'm keeping score. CO5, was that a grading or?
CO5 sounds like a grading plan, yeah.
And does that also carry into CO6?
CO5 is the ground floor and CO6 is the first floor. They're both grading plans, yes. Yep.
Chris, excuse me, Mike. I'm sorry, Mayor.
On CO6, could you just explain that up on the upper right?
On CO6, in the upper, we changed that driveway to right in, right out only.
Oh, okay. So that
Yes, and there's incidental changes with it, with some of the grading and so, yes, we just clouded the whole area.
Mike, I think the one thing I'd like you to focus on is comment 2.3 on page 5 of Ms. McManus' second review letter. Recreation and social amenities. It indicates that her comment was satisfied. There was some additional square footage of amenity. I think it's important you point that out, please.
Sorry, I didn't have it in front of me, my apologies. Page 5?
Page 5, at the top of the page, the paragraph is marked 2.3, recreational social amenities.
Yes, I think you're going to hear more from the architect about that, but yes, before this resubmission, we were relying on a bike rack and kind of using the area as part of the recreation and social amenity. I think it was agreed upon that we could do better than that. We came back with an additional recreation room on the upper floor, and I don't want to give Mr. Engelbaugh's testimony, but that was satisfied by providing more amenity space in the building.
I have no further questions of Mr. Dipple at this time, and so certainly I'm sure he's ready and willing to answer your questions.
Okay, Jeff, did you have any questions for Mr. Dipple?
Yeah, it's actually related to the tree wells. We have an issue in our town where we have trees on I'll just say as an example, on Ridgewood Ave, East Ridgewood Ave. And the tree wells that we have are really they're like brick enclosed, and then they have the tree in it, and then they have all this kind of, almost like concrete now, it's actually dirt. Those tree wells that we have in town don't work very well, and I'm hoping that when you design the tree wells for this particular building, it allows water to actually permeate into the tree. The ones we have right now in our town, they don't allow the trees to get any water in them, and the trees are ending up dying. So if you could just make a note to ensure that any kind of tree well you put in the front of the building, it actually ensures water to permeate into the tree itself.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Understood.
Okay, is that it, Jeff?
It is.
Okay, thanks. Dave?
No questions.
Okay, Susan? Okay. Melanie?
Beth, I wanted to inquire that you were satisfied with the new outdoor amenity area. That met your requests or your original concerns.
Yes, yes, the area along North Maple Avenue, I'm pleased to see, I'm sorry, the area along North Maple Avenue, I'm pleased to see that they've incorporated that area with the 2 benches and some plantings. I think it'll be a nice place for residents or even other passerbys to take a seat. One thing that I was noticing that I didn't include in my review memo, but just a condition of any approval that the board is inclined to grant should include review of any street furniture, such as the 2 benches shown, to the satisfaction of the village engineer and the board planner, just to make sure that it's essentially consistent with other streetscape furniture that you see in the downtown, and it's of a quality that the professionals can support, and for aesthetics, of course, as well.
We agree to that, yeah, absolutely.
The only other question I had was the lights village. You're still working on that with how I just want to make sure I understood correctly. That's still something that's under review with how that's going to spill over into the funeral home parking lot and how that will.
Yeah.
I know you have to do what you can for safety, but.
We were in a bit of a rush, I will admit, but yes, it's difficult. I've got to, like I said, the width of this table, I've got to get the right amount of light here, but not too much over there, and it's not easy with the products that are available, but yes, I will work on it to try to reduce the spillage and come to some agreement with your planner as to how that works. I think it can be improved upon, especially in that area. I'll do my best at the municipal parking lot, but I would think that would only, these are very low light levels to begin with, half a foot candle, that would really only help, that situation.
Okay, thank you, that's all I had.
Joel?
No comments.
Okay, I don't have any either. Board professionals? Chris, did you have any questions?
Mr. Rosehauser, can you raise your right hand? You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
And Mr. Brunage, you stipulate to Mr. Rosehauser as a professional engineer?
I do.
Thank you. I don't know if this is the right opportunity, but the applicant has submitted drawings and information for a major soil permit, as that this project would require one if it was so approved. How do you want to deal with that, Mr. Brunage?
Subject of a separate hearing.
You don't want to include it in this application?
Yeah.
I'm more than happy to discuss it with you, Mr. Martin, and the engineer. Yeah, clearly it's got to be addressed and dealt with, but Dipple's not prepared to testify or deal with that this evening.
Good point. Would you like?
Well, we can speak with it more or less generally, but go ahead.
Speak in generalities, if you like. I mean, should I do that now?
Well, yeah, I mean, you prepared a drawing, cut and fill drawing, you submitted your volume calculations. I've taken a look at them. I find them to be reasonable and representative of the intended work. It's just that as part of a major soil permit process, this board has to include its approval with its actions, and then that'll be followed up by a resolution to the governing body, the mayor and council.
Right, that's what the ordinance requires, and that's what the applicant is more than happy to comply with.
He's just mentioned it just so you don't have to come back later and lose time. So he's mentioned it as a courtesy. So.
I'm sure it's offered in the spirit of getting the job done.
Okay.
And I think
the
notice would allow for that as well, I believe.
Okay, it's just that Mr. Dipple is here, he has submitted the information. I find it acceptable. If the board members have any questions on it, I think Mr. Dipple and myself could try to answer them to the best of our abilities.
And if there's anything more specific, you can work that out with Chris, correct?
Yes.
I guess the only question I would have, Mr. Martin, is whether or not we need to bring Mr. Dipple back for specific testimony, as that'll flow from the conversation with the village engineer as to whether or not the board requires additional testimony.
Well, at the time that the village engineer testifies as to his overall view of the application, if there's anything that he believes is in disagreement, then we may have to bring him back. Otherwise, the board could go with the recommendations, if they choose, of the village engineer.
Fine, so as long as we're clear that there's a complete application in, you're satisfied with Mr. Village Engineer, and we'll incorporate it, therefore, into the application pending before the board for site plan review, preliminary and final site plan.
Yes, subject to them finalizing the issue, yes.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Nothing further, because I'd like to give the applicant an opportunity to review the memo I prepared and sent out this afternoon. I apologize for its lateness, but that's how it is sometimes.
And same thing on that, if there's any disagreement, If not, he doesn't have to come back.
We didn't think that he waited, he could have waited until 6 o'clock. 4:30 is, I'm only kidding him. We understand how it works, and we're not at all offended by the hour of the day that we got the report.
Of the village, yes.
Thank you.
Nothing further, thank you.
Okay. Beth, did you have any questions?
I have just one question.
Can I swear you in? You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
And Mr. Brunich, you stipulate to Ms. McManus as a professional planner?
Most definitely.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So the majority of my comments have been satisfied. There are a couple outstanding items which I think are more appropriate for the architect when he provides testimony. The one outstanding item that I think would be appropriate for Mr. Dipple, am I correct in assuming that the site triangles along Ridgewood Avenue will be provided?
There are some on the plan. It's not on the sheet that I have in front of me. However, yes, because we're generally still working with Bergen County, and they're very specific about their site triangles. That we just want to make sure we got them really kind of from them. It's their right of way. So I do believe they're on there. I believe site distance is on there.
Okay.
But yes, without a doubt, it can be a condition, and we will comply with that request to your satisfaction. Yes.
Thank you. That's all then.
Okay. Next will be the public. Does the public have any questions of Mr. Dipple? Okay. No questions from the public. Okay, you can call your next witness.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Dipple. Good luck in New Milford.
Thanks, Mr. Dipple.
Mr. Toronto, please. Where would you like to sit? If the board doesn't mind, I'll take a seat next to Mr. Toronto. You need an exhibit to be heard? No. Okay, fine.
Toronto, you raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
And for the record, could you state your full name and your business address?
Sure. My name is Tom, T-O-M, Toronto, T-O-R-O-N-T-O. I am president of Bergen County's United Way, 6 Forest, F-O-R-E-S-T Avenue in Paramus, New Jersey.
Mr. Bruni?
Thank you, Mr. Martin, and thank you, Mr. Toronto, for being here. Would you be kind enough to provide the board with a brief overview of your background, your affiliations, your work experience, and then we'll use that as a segue into a little bit about your organization.
Sure, Mr. Burnage. It's a pleasure to be here before the Planning Board in Ridgewood. Organizationally, we've been very interested in developing special needs housing here in Ridgewood, working with your Access for All committee, members of the governing body, the Planning Board, and other professionals for some time. So a pleasure to be before you. I've been employed by Bergen County's United Way since 1985. I've been president of Bergen County's United Way since 2002. For the last 12 years, our organization has been committed as principally a sole focus to developing affordable housing with a particular passion, I would say, for developing what's known as supportive housing for individuals with special needs. Towards that end, we have completed over 40 projects, ranging from the stick-built group homes to redevelopment of existing ranch homes into group homes to right now pending an 85-unit senior housing and special needs housing project in Fairlawn. We've developed several projects surrounding Ridgewood, so to speak. We have built several projects in Allendale and Ramsey. We're building a group home, a stick-built group home in Glen Rock, hoping to start construction this fall. We're at work with the Borough of Hohokus for affordable housing in the downtown of that community. And we are site plan approved, and we'll begin work this fall also with a group home and independent living apartments in the Borough of Wyckoff and many other communities throughout Bergen County and outside of Bergen County as well.
Given that, that history and the deep involvement that both you and your organization have, and your commitment to special needs housing and affordable housing, you've entered into an understanding with 257RA, the applicant that's before the board this evening. Is that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Brunish.
And you're aware that what the applicant is proposing is to take a portion of what we sometimes refer to in this process as the existing Seal Fonds building and repurpose a portion of that to accommodate the special needs housing that you and John Saraceno on behalf of 257RA have discussed. Is that so?
That is correct.
Tell the board, if you will, what you understand the project would be vis-a-vis the special needs housing.
Sure. It's our intention to take the entire what is currently the entire second floor of the former Seal Fond site and convert that into special needs housing, individual apartments, some two-bedroom apartments, to serve folks with special needs, particularly with developmental disabilities, in a supportive housing environment. Developmental disabilities is a broad cross-section that is defined by the state of New Jersey that can include people with MS, cerebral palsy, autism, Down syndrome, even survivors of domestic violence. In this particular development, what we're planning to do is to focus on folks with developmental disabilities similar to the definition and diagnosis of the folks that we served in the neighboring communities. In fact, many of the, I shouldn't say many, but we have tenants currently in our projects outside of Ridgewood who who grew up here in Ridgewood and now live in Allendale or in Ramsey or in Mahwah. We're very familiar with and keep an active database of parents, adult parents, or rather parents of adult children with developmental disabilities. And one of the drivers of folks who have special needs, children who reach adulthood, is what will happen to their child when they're no longer here. So the strong desire for safe, affordable, supportive housing, hopefully in the community where their adult child may have grown up, is absolutely essential. With that in mind, we are aware of parents in Ridgewood and the surrounding area, and I might add parenthetically that when we do our develop our applicant pool, we follow fair housing standards, but one of the obligations that we have as a landlord is to make sure that the folks who live in the communities that we build can live safely and securely. So we look for strong local area networks of support, possibilities for employment, transportation, etc. So the combination of the families that we have in our database, the input that we have received from the many times that I've spoken to your Access for All committee here in Ridgewood, and by the way, as you know, the village has led the way in terms of the development of those Access for All. We know that we would develop a very strong and robust applicant pool of people from Ridgewood, some of whom are known to us. So we would like to tailor the development to best fit the needs of the local constituents writ large for this section of Bergen County.
Is it fair to say that what you've just described is really, I suppose, an expression of how the proposed special needs housing fits in to the community of Ridgewood, this village? As
I mentioned at the outset, my excitement at being here before the planning board is really the realization of a dream that we've had. The village is an extraordinary community. It's an extraordinarily welcome community. It's a community that has extraordinary amenities. So the ability for us, and something we've always been interested in developing, is a kind of a top-of-the-shops model, if you will, that allow folks to walk to recreation, employment opportunities, educational opportunities, transportation, and this community is extraordinary, and this particular location is absolutely extraordinary for our smaller community to integrate into the larger community and take advantage of all the benefits that the village has to offer.
Based on your understanding of the relationship you have with the property owner, in this case the applicant developer, Do you recall the maximum number of units and the number of beds that we expect to find in the project should it be approved?
Sure. We're looking to create 8 units and 15 bedrooms within that second floor space. We've been working with Bruce, the architect from Minnow and Wasco. There are certain considerations from a design perspective, of course, that need to be considered for the population to be served, and really for any population that's going to be living on a second story, which is to be fully sprinklered, to have 2 forms of egress, and ingress, to have an elevator retrofitted to be able to accept a gurney in the case that someone has to be removed by ambulance. And I might add, when I say that remark, that while that's a stipulation of the state, none of the projects that we've completed in any of the communities where we have been have experienced any additional police, fire, or emergency calls by virtue of their being there. One of the things that we have to work with is that this is a time of some transition for the state of New Jersey in terms of how it plans and supports and licenses supportive housing. One of those considerations, which I think is actually quite good for individuals, is a real demand, if you will, that independence, choice, all the characteristics of residential living for folks with special needs should absolutely mimic the same kind of living arrangements that you or I might have. So we're working with the state of New Jersey, and by the way, the site has been visited twice by the state architect and approved for the use. It's also been visited several times by the State Department of Developmental Disabilities, and that is a state agency that provides support budgets to individuals to be able to live with some independence in local communities, and they're thrilled with the site as well. So we are working on a more fluid design to make sure that the characteristics, once we have control of the space and can begin to retrofit it, mirror the still evolving regulations and requirements that the State Department of Developmental Disabilities is developing. That said, we do know, based on conversations with the state, that they are fully in support and embrace the model and the location of this particular housing.
So based on the project as you conceive of it now and as it's been discussed and based on the understanding that you have with the developer, how many staff people would you expect would be on site, and if you can give some understanding to the board as to how they function, whether it's a 24-hour day of staff facility or just what goes on there?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, there's a new dynamic in terms of state government and their approach to how houses or residences like the one that we are proposing are supported. Think of individuals living in their own apartment with some level of support that comes in the form of a variety of different services, some of which may be accessed where they live in their apartment, some of which may be accessed out in the community. There's not going to be a staff, no staff will live in these apartments. There may be, depending upon the specific individuals who live there, awake staff overnight who are there to monitor and make sure that folks, if they are up in the middle of the night, know where they're going, know what to do, may require that level of support. But really it's going to be driven by the particular diagnosis and needs of the individual who's living there with, yes, Mac? Can you just... Sure. So it's going to be driven by the diagnosis and the specific needs of the individual, with an emphasis on independence and the ability of that individual to take advantage of the amenities and what the village of Ridgewood has to offer as a place to live. So typically what you'll see is that these apartments will behave like any other apartments that you have in Ridgewood. Folks typically are not home during the day. If you visited any of our projects in other communities, you'd find for the most part empty parking lots because folks are out either at work, at day programs or activities. By the way, that includes the weekend. The recreational opportunities and the time that folks spend going to a Yankees game, a Mets game, or to a Broadway show is extraordinary to me. So there's a real dynamism to these projects in terms of people being outside. At night, folks come back, they'll prepare a meal. Sometimes that meal will be prepared with a support person. And they'll be going out to the movies in Ridgewood, out to eat in Ridgewood. Our projects tend to be little economic development engines, if you will, and the folks who live in them become known to the shopkeepers throughout the community.
How many staff do you expect will be on site in any 24-hour period?
It could be hard to say, Mr. Brunage. It could be at night a minimum of 2 people would be in the apartment. During the day, it could be very transitional. There could be 4, 5, 6 folks there for a limited period of time until folks are up and out and on to their employment activities or other day service programs that they might visit.
Would the staff have an office on site?
No, we don't build staff offices, and that's very purposeful because, again, the staff are not there to sit at a desk, and they're really there to be in a dynamic relationship with the tenant and with their client. We will do, as folks may even have at home, at the end of the kitchen counter, we will have a built-in, standing desk, for example. We'll have some file space, but pretty much these are not facilities. These are not institutions. These are apartments.
Based on experience and how will your staff, get to the project? Will they be driving, or do you find that they tend to use other forms of transportation?
Well, we find it's a mixed bag. In some cases, we are not service providers. We contract with service providers, and we, for example, a well-known Ridgewood institution, Children's Aid and Family Services, is one of our service providers. We've just completed a group home in Mahwah where they are the service provider. We retrofitted a ranch home in Montvale, 6 bedrooms, where they are the service provider. So they're well known to us. I'm not suggesting they will be, but they could be. And in those circumstances, one of the benefits, so to speak, in terms of this location is its public transportation accessibility. So some of the staff, and that's what we look for typically in a project, to be on a transit line, both for the benefit of the tenants and also for the ability of staff members to use public transportation to get to their jobs. In some cases, staff come with a van to pick up a particular tenant and take them to their activities. In some cases, staff carpool. And in some cases, there are the agency has a staff van, if you will, that drops and picks up people, sometimes with tenants. So, as Mr. Dipple testified, we're comfortable with 2 parking spaces. We doubt that there's going to be anyone sitting in that, or a car or a van sitting in that parking space for any extended period of time. We have done some studies of all of our projects, and what we find is that for every 10 residents, we might have 1 resident who drives a car. Because of this particular location, our bias would be to not have tenants necessarily who need a car, but rather tenants who make use of public transportation and also walk to amenities.
I know that the village, and as expressed by the village planner, there's a concern that the project be occupied by individuals who are at a certain income level. And based on your experience, can you tell the board just what you expect the income level of the residents of this proposed project to be?
Sure, Mr. Brunage. Our experience has been that our tenants, typically for supportive housing, qualify under the low or very low income standard. And I might add that we are responsible as a landlord and sponsor for the projects that we have developed to handle all the regulatory compliance and the affordability certifications on an annualized basis, and we do that in collaboration with the municipalities where our projects exist, but it's not our expectation, nor would it be the responsibility of the village to certify that on an annual basis. That's our role and function.
In other words, based on your comment or the response that you just gave, administration of the project would be your responsibility, not the village's.
That's correct, as well as the property. We also are responsible as property managers for the project, and would be, and that would be a conversation which we've already had with Mrs. Saraceno and his principals of Onyx. The property maintenance in terms of this particular location, obviously pretty minimal. but where we own a piece of property and where we have landscaping, snow removal, and other kinds of requirements, property management is what we handle.
I have no further questions of Mr. Toronto at this time.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, do you have any questions? Dave?
No questions.
Susan?
So first, thank you, Tom. Thank you. So as the Village Council liaison to the Community Access Network, I was thrilled to be able to bring to our last meeting this particular application and share with the members of the Community Access Network that the possibility of some special needs housing was very much on the horizon, and we look forward to this opportunity. Needless to say, the enthusiasm and the excitement was overwhelming, and the emotion was very, very significant. What I wanted to ask you is, if you didn't mind, the developmental disabilities, and I know you and I have had this discussion about the different levels and the mixing of different types of disabilities and when it works and when it doesn't work and the striking that right balance. But if you wouldn't mind just going over the different types of developmental disabilities that might be, that this might be open to. So if you don't mind, and just like with the autistic spectrum, what type of disabilities are in that list?
There's, I believe, 177 different diagnoses.
You don't have to go through all of them, actually, but just as a sampling, if you don't mind.
Sure, of course. So we have tenants who have autism, tenants with Asperger's, we have tenants with cerebral palsy, with MS, Down syndrome. We have folks who have hearing loss, sight issues. So those are typical. What we don't have are folks with, who are ex-offenders or have had drug abuse issues or things of that nature. So this is not. This is a very defined and discrete population that is served. And in some cases, veterans also qualify for special needs housing. And not to belabor the point, but as I mentioned, in Allendale, we started with one project, which led to a second project, which led to a third project, which led to a fourth project, which I think underscores to a certain extent the sense of partnership that we have with individual municipalities. And the latest project that has been approved in Allendale will be 2 single-family homes, 3 bedrooms each, that we are building for what we expect will be a wounded veteran and family. And that will qualify under the special needs category right now for the state of New Jersey. And I would also add, again, not to go on and on, but it is our hope and expectation, and we of course would work with Ms. McManus to make sure that the village, to the extent that it was eligible, would receive the bonus credits, if you will, for bedrooms produced for affordable housing for folks with special needs. So we'd be particularly careful to make sure that the tenant selection was in conformity with that eligibility to the extent that it exists for the village.
Thank you. Just in terms of when you said that you were looking at Ridgewood specifically to look at the need in Ridgewood, and you suggested that there is that database. Mm-hmm. So you can actually identify from that database where our greatest need would be?
Well, we are familiar with many Ridgewood families right now. So we would, of course, we seek to develop a very robust applicant pool. So we spread the word out through social service agencies that serve the population, through the parent network, through a variety of organizations like the Supportive Housing Association for the state of New Jersey, plus, of course, the state's Department of Developmental Disability, to activate as many folks as possible. One of the things that we look to do, and in fact in what we have found in our experience, is that because of the nature of the individual that would be a tenant, that they tend to come from a very tight drive shed, if you will, to use a planning term, I suppose. And that's quite understandable. So what we would expect, I could be wrong, but what we typically find is that It's the local municipality that we're building in that the applicant pool is most representative of, and then the contiguous towns that surround. Because there's a comfort level in terms of families particularly to be able to get to their adult child and not to drive quite a distance. As we've developed more and more projects, we were finding that drive shed increases a little bit. But pretty much it's a very, very drawn from a very local town sort of cluster.
Okay, thank you.
Melanie?
Thank you so much. I have just a couple questions. Is it required for those that are able physically to get out of the, out on their own? Is there any sort of requirement for having employment for living in the dwellings?
There's not a requirement, so to speak, but what we look for in terms of tenant selection is a fit between what the particular characteristics are of where the project is located and the ability of the individual tenant to be involved in part of the community, to take advantage of amenities. What we're thinking about because of this location is that we'll be looking for an applicant pool that has the ability to take advantage of what the village has to offer. In some other projects that we've located in more remote locations, for example, in Ramsey, and we have two that are going on. But the first project that we did in Ramsey was actually the first time in the country, purpose-built housing for folks with autism. So this served a particularly high-need autistic population. By virtue of where this project was located, folks would not be walking the downtown or being able to take advantage of amenities, so to speak. So the quiet, more remote location made sense to serve that population because it was a very contained project. Not to say that people do not go out, but they go out escorted and cared for. So an example of where that site would not make sense for someone who wants to walk to the Dunkin' Donuts or the Starbucks or walk to a movie or walk to employment because it wasn't possible at that location.
The varying, as Susan had mentioned, you went over the 177 possible diagnoses that fit in your guys' wheelhouse. Do any fall under the psychiatric disorder umbrella at all?
No, there is folks who are developmentally disabled are a discrete population and do not have a mental health diagnosis.
Understood. I didn't know if in this 177 that would also have qualified. I just wanted to ask.
No, what we're proposing is supportive housing for folks with developmental disabilities.
Okay.
Not to say that we would not do or have not done supportive housing for folks with mental illness. We have and will, but this is not the proposed use.
This is not
of this.
that, right? Okay. And the 8 units and 15 bedrooms, how many tenants do you, with any sort of developmental delays, or how many tenants in general do you expect to live in each of the 8 units? I know there's the 15 bedrooms,
Well,
so 15 total.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, each person will have their own individual bedroom.
Okay.
And the precise mix right now in terms of 2-bedroom units or 4-bedroom units is what we are negotiating, if you will, and in a spirit of collaboration with the state of New Jersey, based on what they, what their new outlook, in the spirit of what their new outlook is trying to achieve.
I think my only other question was something to along the lines of van pickups and bus pickups and numbers of those per day, per tenant, but I think I'll get to that later on, maybe with the safety testimony. So I think I'm good. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, Joel?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, when you did a review, or the state did a review, were there any deficiencies at all that needed to be addressed at all?
Not deficiencies, but comments about safety, security, ingress, egress. Very typical in all of the projects that we have done, even when it's raw land. The state architect, we asked the state's architect to come and take a look at it and test it for its compatibility with the population to be served. And then after that initial green light, then to work with the specific state agency, in this case the Department of Developmental Disabilities, to make sure that they are satisfied with the site. And then depending upon the funding source, the other state agency we work with is the New Jersey Housing Mortgage Finance Agency. They have their own architect and they have their own team that takes a look at a site for underwriting purposes to determine its fit.
So the plans that have been submitted on this comply with all the requirements for the state? And
Yes, the overall, the plans have been, preliminary plans have been submitted, and they do comply. So on the broad strokes in terms of safety, security, the sprinkler system, area of refuge, other kinds of considerations on the broad strokes they do. The next step is to work more and fine-tune the floor plan internally in terms of the distribution of the apartments and how those apartments are configured.
Okay, and the construction, it's all going to blend. It's not that it distinguishes it or sets it off or anything. It's going to be kind of same finishes and everything. Is that your understanding?
We build to, I believe we build to a very high fit and finish. Certainly on the exterior, there's not going to be any significant change whatsoever to the current space, but on the interiors, we build, especially since we're responsible for this for the long term. We build with very durable finishes because we find that if we spend a little bit more on the front end in terms of the appliances, the flooring, the wallboard, that it saves money in the long run.
And you've indicated there's similar projects and it works well, so you feel very comfortable with this project? For here.
Most of our projects, I would say, this is what we look for, are projects that are in the downtown, proximate or in the downtown. For all the reasons that I mentioned earlier, it just makes for a much more meaningful life and allows for people to flourish.
Okay, that's great. Okay. Yeah, sure, Susan.
Sorry, Tom. I just have a question because I'm just looking at the second floor and I see that it's the 2 bedrooms and then one bedroom. Is that accurate?
Yeah, Mayor, I would only. It depicts a likely floor plan, and we're still back and forth. We're working with a couple of different service providers. And one of the considerations is, what's the configuration that best suits both the individual tenants and then the ability of the service provider to be able to adequately serve folks in the space. So there's a dynamic going on right now, and we're involved with Bruce in terms of what the layout will be. But it's going to be no more than 8 units, no more than 15 bedrooms, in a apartment residential setting.
So, and I guess my question is, because that 15 beds, necessarily, if you have a 2-bedroom unit, how is that actually rented to one individual with a disability, or is it 2 individuals with a disability? And then is it a family member and a member with a disability? Because it would seem to me then there has to be some share. So just walk me through that.
That's an unusual circumstance. These would be individual. One of the requirements that we're working on right now is in terms of the transition with the state benefits is that individual tenants need to have their own leases. If they're in a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, they need to have an individual lease because that signals to the state that there's independence, choice, the ability to have visitors and so on, to live a life just like you or I would live. So it requires an individual, that there be an individual lease. And every bedroom would have an individual in it. So no single individual can rent a 2-bedroom apartment, for example. So there'd be 15 bedrooms, 15 individuals.
So the 2 bedrooms would have a lease per bedroom, essentially, rather than unit?
Yeah,
okay.
That is correct. And one of the things that we do, and I think we've developed a good capability of doing, is that we make roommate matches. We have a lot of 2 bedrooms. We also have 4-bedroom group homes. So what we're looking for is to match people with complementary skills and capabilities.
Okay.
So it's a very careful, and I would add that in terms of tenant selection, There is an application process available for download from our website, an open application process, and may even be available with the village as well. We often do that with municipalities. Hard copy pickup here at the Village Hall. Every individual is interviewed. Their guardians, their parents, their siblings, not to be invasive, but to get a full picture of the individual and what their capabilities are, what their proclivities are. We also interview their current service provider. Often that current service provider follows the individual into their living situation as well. When I say follow, I mean continues to provide service, doesn't live with them necessarily. No one lives there, but provides service to their they may have provided service while they were in their parents' home or living elsewhere. Now they'll provide services here in Ridgewood. All of that is looked at, and we sift and go over and then begin to make the roommate matches. Again, the goal is to make sure that we have folks who live in our projects who can live safely, securely, and take full advantage of what that particular project has to offer, the community has to offer. So it's a very, very careful and thorough examination.
Thank you. I have a question. Could you describe the legal relationship that your organization will have with the owner of the property?
Sure. We would have a kind of a master lease for the second floor. And then we would have a contract with, and this is what's kind of in flux with the state of New Jersey, whether we have a contract with one individual service provider, or if we have a relationship with one or more. We're thinking one right now, but depending upon the dynamic in terms of how benefits are provided to individuals with developmental disabilities, there could be a mix of service providers, folks in the project. We don't think that's likely, but it's possible. But that's actually more the routine for us. We both have single service providers in group home settings, and then we have multiple service providers in the independent living apartments that we have throughout the community. So either way, it'll work. But right now, we're kind of driven by what the state of New Jersey and the State Department of Developmental Disabilities wants on behalf of its clients, if you will.
So these service providers, what service specifically do they provide?
Could be transportation to their employment, could be a job coach when they're at their employment. Several of our tenants work at Moe's Southwest Grill. The family that owns Moe's Southwest Grill is from Wyckoff. They hire folks with developmental disabilities as a purposeful business act. So a job coach could follow folks there, as an example, provided by a service provider. All these service providers, by the way, have to be licensed by the state of New Jersey to do what they do. So there's a relatively small group of folks who are permitted to do this work. We have folks who work at Park Avenue BMW. We have folks who work at the Kunish family that owns the Allendale Bar and Grill and the Mawa Bar and Grill hire our folks all the time. So there's, and in some cases they have a job coach, in some cases they have transportation to their job. Folks go up to the Y in Wyckoff and part of a special program there, swimming and to the gym, and sometimes the staff members, goes with someone, accompanies someone on kind of a buddy system. So there's a whole range of services that folks provide.
Does this legal relationship you have with the property owner, does it have contingencies for changes? Have you experienced in your previous projects situations where there were unanticipated issues that needed to be worked out in any way?
Well, we'll have a lease, and that lease will have it is a pretty thick document, and we have ground leases in place in some instances where we've either bought a property in partnership with a municipality, or a municipality has conveyed property to us to build on. We have reverters, we have deed restrictions, which means that we can't 10 years from now change the use to a commercial use or change the use to a market rental. And we're quite content and happy with those kinds of restrictions because we are affordable housing developers, so we're not looking to change the use 10 years from now. So the village would be protected in terms of the affordability requirement. The tenants would be protected. The individual tenants would have one-year leases, is typically what we do with options terms. So they're not locked into long-term leases in case they don't like living there and want to, relocate. But our arrangement with Onyx will be over the long term, 30-year period.
You'll have a 30-year agreement with, is that what you said? I'm sorry, 3 or 30?
Right. Right now, what we're talking about is a 30-year lease agreement, which would correspond to the affordability requirements, I believe, that are generated by the Enclave project. And I would also add that this is not an uncommon relationship for us. We very often work with market rate developers that have an affordable obligation and fulfill their affordable obligation, on another site. I mentioned earlier we're going to be building 85 units in Fairlawn at the corner of River and Maple. That was a negotiation with the Borough of Fairlawn and with Garden Homes, which redeveloped the former Kodak site on Route 208. And we were able to shift the affordable obligation from what's known as the Promenade development to the River and Maple site and build housing, senior housing that Fairlawn did not have but wanted. And that was approved by the courts, approved by the special master, and that project we expect to get underway this fall. So that one of the projects we built in Allendale, not to go on and on about it, was another negotiation with Garden Homes, where we shifted an obligation from the project known as the Whitney to what's known as Crescent Commons, kind of a rundown site on Crescent Avenue in Allendale that we were able to purchase with money from Garden Homes through the borough's Municipal Housing Trust Fund, and then some of our own equity, and redevelop a site to the delight of the neighbors that was pretty run down and had some environmental remediation requirements, and built a beautiful affordable housing project that's rental and also home ownership with some special needs as well, which was a bit of a breakthrough at the time.
Fairlawn project that you just described, that 85 units all for the United Way?
Yes, it's affordable housing. It's going to be 85 units of senior housing, not all 85 units will be senior. 11 of those units are going to serve special needs individuals as an infill, still affordable. So it's going to have both a special needs component, including some veterans housing, which qualifies as special needs. And then, so 11 from 85 is 74. 74 senior units and then 11 special needs units, so 85. And there's a superintendent's apartment in there somewhere. I'm not... So it might net down to 73 senior units, as I recall.
And would you anticipate that the enclave would part of the population could be veterans?
It's possible. I'm not going to rule it out. It really depends upon what the applicant pool develops. It could be possible. Yes.
Yeah, the only reason I ask is I'm board attorney in Emerson, and there's Bergen County related
the housing authority, right?
Veterans housing there. Was that part of or different?
That's a different organization than us. Yeah. But we did do a 4-bedroom group home in Emerson.
Yes.
Tom, just so I understand, so the Fairlawn location, Garden Homes, that's the, what's the name of that one?
It's the Promenade site right on Route 208. There's a Starbucks.
So what you're saying is all of their affordable housing that was required to be included for that particular property has been shifted to another location, so they have no affordable on-site, and all the affordable is off-site and is either special needs or...
Senior.
I'm sorry?
Or senior.
Or senior. So the idea, I mean, I'm just, I know this is not relevant necessarily to what we're discussing, but, the challenge is that the concept behind affordable housing is that there are also families who can afford housing.
Right.
And so the shifting of all that housing, certainly, I'm surprised that all gets green-lighted, because it seems to undermine what the true effort is.
I don't disagree, Mayor. This was done about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's taken that long for this project to wind its way to fruition, and at that time, Fairlawn's quota of family rental units was considered to be pretty good. What they were lacking was senior housing.
Right.
So in the overall design or architecture of Fairlawn's affordable housing situation, senior housing was viewed as being a deficit, not family rental. So that conversion was easy to do in terms of trying to best satisfy the affordable housing obligation. And then the inclusion of special needs housing was something that an incentive was provided as a condition of the construction financing to do that, and the borough embraced it.
It's just striking a balance, I guess,
Yep.
for everybody's need. Okay.
Okay. Chris, did you have any questions?
None, thank you.
Okay, Beth?
Just a couple questions. I want to put a finer point on some of the affordable housing issues that were discussed this evening, just to make sure I'm clear, and it's also clear for the record. Mr. Tonto, I think I heard you talk about 30-year affordability controls that'll be applied to the property. You mentioned a 30-year lease, but will the affordability controls be in the form of a deed restriction on the property? Is that the proposal, or are you seeking another form of affordability controls?
I wasn't thinking of a deed restriction because we're not going to own the property. I was thinking of a lease that the lease agreement would control. And then whatever resolution or stipulation that might come from this proceeding, which would also govern, the behavior of the property going forward.
Will you also receive, you mentioned HMFA funding and potentially other funding sources as well. They typically have affordability controls, but I'm not sure if exactly what funding you're going to be seeking, if that would be applicable.
Yeah, we're not, I'm not suggesting that we're necessarily going to seek HMFA funding.
Okay.
What we're talking about is a retrofit of an existing space, and we think that we can do that. We've certainly had conversations with the borough, with the village, in terms of their support from the Municipal Housing Trust Fund. But I'm not anticipating that we would necessarily pursue HMFA, which, by the way, at least currently, the cupboard's a bit bare there.
Say that again, I'm sorry?
They don't have money that they're not underwriting quite, projects like they once did currently.
Yeah.
And they've reached a volume cap in terms of some other funding. And we weren't anticipating using the home program either. Because of the nature of the site in terms of its retrofit, it's not eligible necessarily for some other kinds of subsidies. But, we have a commitment from the owner to help with the retrofit, which we think is going to be pretty efficient. There's, for example, an existing sprinkler system, an existing elevator shaft has to be expanded, but there's some other characteristics of the building that lend itself to a low cost relative to stick-built retrofit.
Are you comfortable sharing the lease with the board or its board professionals? Because my concern for the board's information is that there's a lot of effort going through to make sure that there's affordable housing incorporated into this project, obviously, such that the village can receive affordable housing credit. And what I want to make sure is that we're going to get the full credit that the village deserves, because the units will in fact be reserved for affordable households. But I want to make sure there's documentation that the court will ultimately support. So if you're comfortable sharing that lease, that would, I presume, reference it being contingent upon providing affordable housing. That's something that I would like, or I'm open to other forms of documentation that might be a substitute affordability controls, but it sounds as if it's the lease is going to serve as the primary document.
Yeah, and my memory of the lease is that actually it is a benchmark, so to speak, to these proceedings insofar as our responsibility to comply and conduct into the future this space as affordable housing in support of the village's requirements, the enclave developers' requirements, and so on. So I have no issue at all with sharing the lease and making sure that it has the kinds of controls the village seeks.
Is that available between now and the next meeting so that I could take a look?
I think a draft of it can be made available. We're still fine-tuning it based on, as I mentioned earlier, the state's requirements.
Just so the record is clear that I can't speak to the availability of a lease and when you might be able to look at it, if at all, frankly. But I understand your concern, and we certainly would cooperate not only with United Way, but with the village. Look, the approval that we're seeking is clearly dependent upon the zoning. It's clearly dependent upon the requirements of the ordinance, and in terms of affordability and in terms of the number of units, et cetera, and the obligation to make certain that you get the credit on the village's overall housing obligation, affordable housing obligation. We understand that interrelationship. So making certain that there is sufficient documentation to support those conclusions and those objectives is absolutely fine. I just can't say at this time whether or not the property owner is prepared to make the lease a public document.
I can understand why that's a sensitive document. I'd expect that portions of it would be, if you can share it, I would expect that portions of it would be redacted, but I think you understand my concern. We want to, and I think I think everybody is on the same page and operating in good faith about trying to create affordable housing that the village will get credit for. I just have the added responsibility of making sure that the court sees it the way that we all see it, which is these units are going to be affordable for the next 30 years.
My relationship.
I've actually done this, and the language required for the ordinance, the statute, the state requirements, and the lease language on affordability controls, I put that in a resolution. In terms of the financial aspects, it's irrelevant to the situation. I mean, as long as it's considered affordable housing.
Yeah, let's just make it clear on the record that we fully understand and appreciate Mrs. McManus's concern. My relationship years ago with Ronald Reagan got me always to the point where we trust but we verify. And I understand you're saying we trust what you're purporting to do, but we want to verify.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, and so I get it.
And one more question. I think I heard you say that there'll be not more than 15 bedrooms of special needs housing,
right.
But I wanted to find out, is there a minimum that you commit to as well, or is it really 15 bedrooms?
That's been our operating principle. That's
Okay.
15 bedrooms.
Thank you. I just want a clarification on that.
Does the credit apply if any bedroom at any point, is it per bedroom, is it per unit? And I don't know if that's a valid question at this point, and if a unit is at any point not filled, does the credit apply in that?
The unit of credit is for the bedrooms in the units, and they must be built, they must be occupied.
I just had another question. Questions beget questions. Something you said earlier, and Beth kind of brought it full circle, and I think of a 30-year lease, and we're talking about credits and take care of our affordable component, but then there's people that we're talking about, and it's a very vulnerable members of our society. And in 30 years, and I'm sure you know that with certain disabilities, any level of change is dramatic and traumatic and difficult. And when we talk about parents who worry what will happen to their children when they're gone, well, and I happen to know just a 15-year-old that has a fairly significant disability, developmentally disabled. So if I look down the road 30 years from now, he could be like 50 years old. What happens to that vulnerable part of our population when suddenly this 30-year lease expires and now there's no more affordable housing for disabled? And then because that's then put into the general stock. So what happens, Tom?
Well, Mayor, it doesn't necessarily stop being affordable at the end of 30 years. And in fact, I'll take, I believe there's an option a renewal option in the lease. But typically, due to the, I guess, the law of perpetuities, you can't say forever. I think we've gone as far as 40 years. Okay. But typically 30 years is sort of the integer that's used for affordability purposes. So certainly the projects that we built and own, it's not our intention. Hopefully it might be my decision 30 years from now when I somehow doubt that. but it's not the organization's intention to convert them.
No, I understand,
after the affordability runs out. In this particular instance, I think that there's, there'll be enough time as the end of the lease approaches to deal with that question in terms of the affordability. One of the things that happens in individual municipalities, and one of the reasons municipal housing trust funds exist, is that there are maintenance of existing condominiums or rental apartments on a scatter site basis that count towards the affordability index for a particular town. So that's something that, would probably, I would say, likely occur as the end of this term, this 30-year term approaches. But it's certainly a question we can talk over with our colleagues at Onyx.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Is there any, they're one-year leases, so, it seems unlikely anybody's thinking 30 years down the road if the leases really operate in 1 year.
Well, no, the leases, I may have misspoke. The overall master leases for the space.
Understood, I understand.
But the individual tenants who would live there would need to have 1-year leases, really as a protection for them, so that they're not locked into a long-term lease in case they decide they don't want to live there anymore. Again, speaking to their independence, their freedom, and their flexibility. In those leases, though, is a renewal, I'm not going to say an automatic renewal, but a renewal functions, to come back to what the mayor was saying, because what parents want and what the individual wants is stability over the long term. But the state does not want people to be locked into long-term living arrangements.
Okay, that's a piece I was missing. Thank you.
Okay, you done? Okay. Next will be questions from the public. Does anyone from the public have questions? Okay, seeing there none, I guess you're done, Mr. Toronto.
Thank you.
Next witness, Tom, or did you need a break?
I'd appreciate a short break, and I think the reporter might as well.
Okay, sure. We'll take a 5-10 minute break.
Thank you.
Okay. You call the roll?
You're like, oh, I gotta recuse myself.
Mayor Knudsen,
Here.
Councilman Voigt,
Here.
Mr. Joel,
Here?
Mr. Scheibner,
Here.
Mr. Torrielli,
Here.
Mr. McWilliams.
Here.
Okay, thanks, Michael. Mr. Brunage, you have
Thank
the
you,
floor.
Mr. Joel. Yeah, on behalf of our client, we're calling from Minnow and Waska, Mr. Bruce Engelbaugh, who's
Sir,
here
can you
this
stand
evening.
up? You raise your right hand, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
And you're a professional architect,
Yes.
licensed in New Jersey,
Yes.
testified before numerous planning boards in the state of New Jersey,
Yes, I have.
and you're still accepted to do so today. Thank you.
Bruce, you're the architect for the project that is commonly known, at least here in Ridgewood, as the Enclave. And at the request of our mutual client, 257RA, and its managing member, John Saraceno, the Minnow and Waska, under your direction, has prepared architectural plans for the project. Is that so?
That is correct, yes.
And those plans were submitted to the board, or to the village, some number of months ago, and revised most recently and refiled or represented to the board. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You appear here this evening with a number of exhibits. You heard some of the back and forth between myself and Mr. Martin earlier this evening. Last month, in hoping that we'd save everybody time, we went ahead and pre-marked a bunch of exhibits. What we've done, so the record is clear, Mr. Martin, is that Mr. Engelbaugh has brought he has brought fresh boards, fresh exhibits, which, interestingly enough, follow, and in numbering, follow the original pre-marked exhibits, but we're marking them AR. And so for the architectural exhibits, starting with AR6, all the way down through AR10, and then there's a subset of AR10A through L. That will be the subject of tonight's testimony.
AR6 through AR10, A through L.
Correct.
And just bear with me, Mr. Brunage, because sometimes the pre-hearing activities become more exciting than the hearing activities. Since your witness did not testify previously, I did not mark any of the A's, much less the AR. So what are we going to call this one?
We're going to call that AR, and that's going to be AR6.
Great. Go ahead, sir.
Now, Mr. Engelbaugh, in addition to preparing the large-scale exhibits that are copies of the plans submitted to the Village of Ridgewood, you also, at our request and for the convenience of the board, prepared some 11 by 17s.
That is correct. The drawings that were submitted earlier were black and white. We've colorized them so it's easier for everybody to read them.
And the packet of colorized 11 by 17s that you've been kind enough to distribute to the board are copies of the plans that you're going to testify from, and copies, therefore, of the plans that were submitted to the village as part of the application.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Tell us about this project.
Okay, let's begin at the top, I guess. The exhibit that you're looking at on the board now are some snapshots of downtown Ridgewood. And back when we originally started this project, you'll see the date on this exhibit is actually 2012. So that's when we started working on this. That's when those pictures were taken, and that's when we developed our initial concepts. And it's probably good if you looked at the ones on the right-hand side, because that embodies a lot of the architectural vocabulary that we tried to incorporate into the enclave. You'll see at the street level there are shops. I'm looking for my laser pointers. So there are shops down here at this level, and you can see they all have some sort of a horizontal band that separates that retail on the lower level from what I'll call the middle level. These are divided horizontally, somewhat with a base, a middle, and a top. In the middle area, you can see there's punched windows, and then at the top, you can see there's a decorative entablature. And when we get to the enclave elevations, you'll see we've incorporated that as well. The other thing to note in these is vertically,
you'll see these divisions. Now, those occurred back in the day, I think, when the property lines kind of designated an individual owner's building. He gave it his own identity. So these always were broken into sub-segments as you went along the street. And you'll see, once again, when you get to the elevations of the enclave, that we tried to do that same thing. If you drill in a little bit tighter, you can see again there's punched windows, you can see there's balconies. Sometimes you have single windows, sometimes you have double windows, sometimes there's a straight window head, sometimes there's a curved window head. And on and on and on with all those little details that give each one its individuality and its character. So keep this in mind, I guess, as we go through the presentation. Like I said, when we originally tried to do this, we wanted to do a design that would fit nicely within the architectural fabric of Ridgewood. We also wanted to, from a more functional standpoint, we wanted to fulfill a need by providing market rate rental housing. We also wanted to provide another need, which would have been special needs for that underserved segment of society. And we wanted to, being architects, we want to make a nice building that we're proud of, and hopefully, fits nicely in Ridgewood that you're all proud of, and it serves the applicant well in the whole process. So let's move on to the next exhibit, which would be the site plan.
That's been marked, has it not, Bruce?
This has been marked AR7.
Thank you.
And it's labeled site plan, and it has a revision date of 8/2/2017. I think most of you are familiar with this, but let's just run through a little review of it. The Seal Fawns building, which is the green building, is on the left. And the top floor, which is the second floor, that's where we're going to be putting in the special needs units. So the whole building isn't getting renovated, it's just the top floor for the special needs units. And then over in the corner, you don't see it on this plan, but there's an elevator, and we're going to enlarge that elevator, as Mr. Toronto said, so it can accommodate a gurney. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see a tan building. This is the new proposed enclave building. And you can see there's 39 dwelling units in there. It's labeled on the roof there. This building gets a little more complex. I'll try to explain it as best I can. In general, it's 5 levels. And it's basically 4 levels over parking, but when you get to the first floor, it's a mix of parking and residential. We'll see that when we get into the floor plan. Let's just look at a little bit, first off, to get oriented. This is Ridgewood on the left. This is North Maple going along the bottom here. And then Franklin Avenue goes vertically up on the right-hand side here. So if you were to come into this building as a resident, you would drive in either, well, if you're coming into the ground level, actually, which is the lowest level, you would come in off of North Maple Avenue right here. That's the ingress into the garage. And you would ramp down about 2.5 feet to take you to the lowest parking level, which is at the same level as the Seal Fawns parking lot, which is under the Seal Fawns building. I think you're familiar with that. We also have a front entrance right in the middle of the building here. And to get to that entrance, you could either go down a ramp for barrier-free service right here, or there's steps on the other side. And again, that takes you down about 2.5 feet to the ground floor level. To get to the first floor, that's the next level above the ground floor, you would drive up the ramp off of Franklin Avenue, and that's this little parking area here. So it's going to ramp up, and then it takes you to a surface parking level that is above the parking garage that we just talked about. And you'll see that as you drive up this ramp, you drive under the building, okay? So when we get to this, the first floor plan, you'll see that there's space under the building here for cars to park and for circulation to occur. And there's also a main entrance under there too. Again, you can't see it on this plan. You'll see it when we get to the first floor. One more thing to notice on this plan is the roof terrace that's facing out towards North Maple Avenue. What we've done is we've taken that story off the top
so that the facade that faces out onto North Maple Avenue is a whole floor lower. It's going to make the building appear much lower, and it actually provides a great amenity for the residents with a whole roof deck. It's rare that we have a roof terrace this large in the project. Just for some statistics, if you look down in the right-hand corner, I think we know these by now, but you can see there's 39 units in the enclave, and there's 8 units in the special needs where the Seal Farms building is, and it also has a parking breakdown there. The total parking is 131 spaces. So let's move on to the next elevation, the next exhibit, which will be the elevation, and that's going to be the North Maple Avenue elevation, where my laser's pointing right now, looking at the building here. So this will be exhibit AR8. Its title is Elevations. And the drawing title is actually East Elevation, which would be, again, the North Maple Avenue elevation. If you look on the left side, you'll see that's the Seal Farms building. And on the right-hand side is the new Enclave building. The reason I put this exhibit up here is so you can see the big picture, so you can see the whole elevation that would face onto North Maple Avenue. The next exhibit I have is zoomed in to the Enclave portion of the building, so we can see more of the detail. So let's move on to that. Okay, this is exhibit AR9. It's also labeled Elevations as revision dated 2017. And like I'm saying, this is a close-up of the Enclave portion of the building. That main entrance that we were talking about is right here in the center. And that garage entrance is off to the left-hand side. You see that right here in my elevation.
Bruce, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. In looking particularly at AR9, I see, at least to my eyes, 3 areas that have sort of I'll call it a red cloud. What's that all about? Why are these areas on AR9 been marked off with this red clouded area?
Okay, you're going to see the red cloud as we go through the presentation. The red cloud, I would say 90% of them are in response to the Beth McManus memo. The other 10% of those are improvements that we've made on our own because we felt it made a better functioning building. So let's look at the overall elevation here. You'll see, and I'm kind of echoing back to the vocabulary of the photographs of downtown Ridgewood. You'll see that this has a base along the bottom, has a nice strong horizontal line. It separates what I'll call the middle of the building. Those are those punched windows that we had talked about earlier on the Ridgewood photos, downtown Ridgewood photos. And then you'll see up on top, it has an entablature. And then the other component of this is the vertical, what I'll call segmentation, where we try to divide, even though this is one long building, we've subdivided the facade into different areas, so each one has its own individuality and personality, somewhat similar to the way Ridgewood Avenue is in downtown Ridgewood. Looking into more of the details, you'll see there's balconies, there's some bay windows, box bay windows. Sometimes we have double windows, sometimes we have single windows, and there's triple windows. So again, we're using that variety to give each one of these segments its own character and individuality. You might look up at the entablatures. You'll see behind this, and that's the 4th story in the background. It's lighter. And that is actually about 30 to 32 feet behind what I'll call the face of the North Maple Avenue elevation. So it sits back there pretty far. And when we get to the building section, you'll see it's not visible from the sidewalk level. Materials, we're looking to use primarily brick veneer on all of this frontage. The bay windows have
finish of cementitious board, and then a product called AZAC, which is kind of a synthetic product that looks like wood. The reason we like to use that is it's very durable and doesn't rot. Couple other things while we're on this elevation. You'll see down in the lower right-hand corner, those dark gray areas, those represent grills that go into the parking deck. And you'll see some of them on the right side and some of them on the left side as well. If you go right into the center of the drawing, again, that's that main entrance. But you'll see there's windows that flank either side of the door. And we actually have some amenity spaces down there. There's a fitness room on the left side, and then there's a club room on the right-hand side. And again, you'll see those when we get to the plans. So, speaking of the floor plans, let me address these red clouds here. You'll see the one red cloud where there's an answered roof. There used to be a box bay window here, and that interrupted that roof line. So we've gotten rid of that box bay window so that this can be a nice continuous and carry through the integrity of that roof design. Then down, kind of where it says precast accent toward the lower right-hand corner, you'll see another red cloud. That used to be tan-colored brick, and we changed that to precast so we could, that actually was a response to the planner memo. And that puts a base on the building. And I think everybody thinks that that's an improvement. So let's move on to the floor plan.
I guess A would be the ground floor plan?
Correct.
A is the ground floor plan, correct? It was sheet number A1. It has a visual date of 8/8/2017. Okay, again, just to get you oriented, it has the same orientation as the site plan we were just looking at. North Maple Avenue goes along the bottom, and Franklin Avenue is up on the right-hand side. Now again, this is what I call the ground level plan. It's basically, you could almost refer to it as a basement because it's really below grade. The colored in portion here represents the parking garage that's underneath the enclave building. You'll see a line right where my laser pointer is now. Everything to the left of that, that would be the garage area that's under the Seal Fawns building. So let's go back over to the colored area. You'll see in the middle of that, there is the front door and a corridor that takes you through all the way out to the garage in the back. There's pink spaces. On the left side, you'll see there's a fitness room, and on the right side, there's a club room. In the back, there's some 2 toilet rooms and 2 elevators. One's a passenger elevator, the other is a service elevator. And we have some red clouds. You'll see the red cloud here on the right-hand side. Garage. That's where we added the turnaround space. And then if you go over near the barrier-free spaces, you'll see another cloud, and that's where we moved that previous parking space to gain that turnaround space. You'll see some red clouds over on the right where the statistics are, and all we did was adjust the bedroom mix in special needs units. It used to be 4 one-bedrooms and 4 two-bedrooms. Now, as you can see, it's 1 one-bedroom and 7 two-bedrooms. Let's go over to the next one, which is the first floor plan. Exhibit AR10B. Day 1 is 5/2/2017. So if we look over on Franklin Avenue, this is the driveway that I said was an incline. So you drive up this to get to the upper level. And here's the front door into the building on the first floor level right here. It's hard to see it, but this dotted line where my laser pointer is going around, that's the outline of the building up above. If you remember, this is
sort of an L-shaped, inverted, or a backwards L shape. Let me put the site plan up so you can see it. So this is that backwards L shape on the site plan down below. I don't know if everybody can see that or not. And that is this right here. So this portion that you're driving under is this portion right here. Okay? One of the items in the planner's memo had to do with this perimeter, which again is hard to see. And I think the comment said that wherever there's a portion of the building, that structural wall needs to come down to conceal the parking. We're not going to be able to do that on this. As you can see, it will very much encumber the parking circulation in here. And my opinion as an architect, I would like to have as much air and as much light in that space as possible, because you're under a parking deck, and if you put walls up, it's going to get dark in there. I think it should remain light. People should be able to see because there's cars driving through there. But this is something that was outlined on Beth McManus's memo that we'll need to discuss.
And on this particular exhibit, AR-10B, the area that you were just describing and referencing, the parking sort of in that area that you conscribed with your laser pointer.
Right here?
Yeah, right in the middle there. That lies under the building above.
That is correct.
Right, so the parking is at this level, and the building above, there you go. The building above provides the cover, if you will, for that particular area, which is now marked in red and hatched as well.
Yes. That is this.
Okay.
So you drive underneath that. And it's nice because it gives a nice coverage to that front door. So in any climate weather, it's dry, you're covered.
So people parking on that level, residents of the enclave, the market rate units above, will be able to access the elevator bank and I guess a lobby on that level in a protected way.
That is correct, yes.
Thank you.
The design of this, again, this is the residential units down here in tan color. This is what we call a double-loaded corridor, meaning we have units on each side of the corridor. You'll see these two-bedroom dens face out onto North Maple Avenue, and then we have these other 3 units in the back that face out towards the parking lot. Where the elevators are, right behind that, you can see there's a service area, and right to the right-hand side of that is a trash room. So there would be a trash chute in the building. All the trash would come down to this room, and then it would go out these double doors to this dark gray colored area up in the upper left-hand corner. And that's what we're going to call a trash transfer station. So the trash would be transported by the porter out of the trash room over to the trash transfer station, and then there's a chute where it goes down to the level below, and then that's where the trash truck can pick up all the trash. Let's move on to the next level. The second floor plan, exhibit AR-10E.
C?
A3.
Is it AR-10C? I don't think so.
Should be C.
AR-10 should be C.
So this is, the sheet number is A3, and the date is 8/2/2017. It's a revision date. The only thing that changed on this from the last one is over on the left-hand side. This is the arrangement or the floor plan layout for the special needs units on the seal front side of the building. You can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 two-bedrooms, and then in the light tan color is the one-bedroom, and then in this light green color is a community space. From talking with Tom Toronto, I understand there's going to be like a kitchenette in here and a living room, and this is where the any of the staff members would probably be. There is no office, but there might be they might have a little workstation, the kitchen or something like that. Over on the right-hand side is the enclave portion of the building. You can see the two elevators. In gray is the trash room that we just spoke about. And at each end of the hallway there is a fire stair.
So it's clear the special needs that would exist in the existing Seal Funds building is not directly assessed or accessible to or from the proposed enclave market rate units. Is that correct?
That is correct. Part of that reason is the floors don't align. So let's move on to the third floor. This is exhibit AR10D, is in Delta. The date is 5/2/2017. Sheet number is A4, and it's the third floor. This is very similar to the second level we looked at. It's just a double-loaded corridor. It has units on each side. A stairway is at each end. Elevators in the middle here, and the trash room. Like I said, basically the same as the second floor at Stax. Let's move on to the fourth floor. This is exhibit AR10E, sheet number A5, fourth floor, revision date of 8/2/2017. The things that have changed on this when you compare it to the floor below is here's where you see the roof deck that's facing out onto North Maple Avenue. And then behind that is, I guess, a single loaded corridor because we just have units on the one side. And then the vertical leg is a double loaded corridor. You'll see a red cloud on this, what's called the amenity space, that kind of a pink colored. And that is the new room that we added that came up in Beth McManus's memo where we needed some more amenity space. So we've added this space in here, and it gives us a good overage of what the requirement is. So let's move on to the next sheet. This is exhibit AR10F, sheet number A6. It's the roof plan, and it has a revision date of 8/2/2017. The thing to take note of on the roof plan, I think, is the mechanical equipment. You'll see a red cloud. If you look down on the lower right-hand corner, there's a typical rooftop unit detail. And there's a red cloud on this louver system. And what that does is it's going to screen the units so that if anybody ever saw these up on the roof, they would be screened by this louver system. And that louver system would go around all of the areas where there are condensing units. Then there's another red cloud where we added the amenity space over on the left side there. Next exhibit. This is AR10G, sheet number A7. It's entitled The Elevations, and a revision date of 8/2/2017. Up on the very top is the North Maple Avenue elevation. It's in black and white, and we've already talked about this, so let's skip over that. The lower elevation is the south elevation, and it's what you would see from Ridgewood Avenue. You would see the Seal Farms building in the foreground, and then way in the background, you would see the Enclave building. You would see this portion on the right-hand side, that would be closest to you, that would be this, if you look on the site plan. And then this leg of the building towards the left would be this leg back here. So you can see it's a good distance away from Ridgewood Avenue, this portion of the building. There are some red clouds on here. You'll see the amenity space was added up in the upper right area. There's a red dotted line and then a cloud around the note that says amenity space. And over on the right-hand side, you can see we added a signage detail and a garage screen detail. Both of these were on Beth McManus's memo. I think she's good with what we're showing and proposing now. If you look back on the south elevation, you'll see another red cloud at the top of that exterior stair. That just represents that trash transfer station that we were talking about right here. And that was changed to brick. It was stucco before, and now it's brick. Next exhibit is AR10H, sheet number A8. It's labeled the elevations, and it has a revision date of 8/2/2017. If you look at the top elevation, this is the west elevation. The Seal Farms building is off on the right-hand side, and then the new enclave portion is on the left-hand side. So we would be looking this way on the site plan. So looking at the top, you'll see some red clouds. Over on the left-hand side, we have a brick area, and that previously did not have any windows. As a part of Beth's memo, she had recommended we put some windows in here, so that's what that red cloud refers to. We've changed those blank walls into walls that now have some windows, so it looks much nicer. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see where it says amenity space. There was no space here before. There was no wall because there was no room there. We've added that room, and again, that's that amenity room. There's another red cloud down to the lower right. That's the trash transfer station, and we changed all that material to brick where it was stucco before. Again, that was a recommendation on Beth's memo, which we upgraded that finished material. You can see as far as on the back, we have brick. We have a mix of brick finish material, and then we have stucco material in here, and then this is brick in here as well. Moving down, this is the north elevation. This is what would be facing Franklin Avenue. If you look down in the lower right-hand corner, this would be the ramp up, the drive ramp up right here that comes in off of Franklin Avenue. That's located right here. So you would drive up that ramp and then drive under this building, and that's where you see these columns that are supporting the 3 floors up above. I don't think we had any red clouds on this, but just a little bit about the elevation. On the far left, you'll see that's brick veneer. And then we have a stucco portion as you move toward the right. In the center, there's a brick veneer portion, switches back to stucco, and then to the far right, we have brick veneer again. So we're trying to mix those materials to give it a little bit of interest and break the scale down, even though this sits back a good distance from Franklin Avenue here. That's this facade right here that we're looking at. Let's move on to the next sheet. This is AR10I, sheet number A9, and it's a building section, and its revised date is 8/2/2017. This really helps to explain what the building looks like. If you look to the far right, you'll see North Maple Avenue. And then as you drive in off of North Maple Avenue, this is the slope down into this garage area. So the garage area goes from the front of the building here all the way to the back. If you go up above here, this is that surface parked area that I was telling you about that serves the first floor of the building, and these are those 2 dwelling units on that level. And the main entrance would be here as well. Moving farther to the right here, you can see that there's 3 dwelling units that stack over top of the garage, and then there's the terrace up on top. And you'll see that dotted line, that sight line that goes down to a person standing on the opposite side of North Maple Avenue on the sidewalk there. You can see where that sight line cuts off, so that wall that's in question as far as what material is being used is set back, like I said, about 30 feet from the North Maple face of the building. There's a red cloud up on top. All that shows is the louvers that go around the mechanical equipment. One thing to note, you'll see down in the lower left-hand corner, it says subsurface utility room. There's a basement there right now that's currently constructed, and we're going to put a ramp. The drive into the garage is going to go over top of that basement area. We're going to use as much of that basement as we can for incoming utilities, electric, maybe water, things like that. There's a lot of science and technicalities that's going to go in there. We're going to have to go in and measure it very clearly to understand the floor levels. We're going to have to look at all the mechanical equipment that's coming in there, but we'd like to use that as much as we can if possible. But again, that's an existing basement. It has a ceiling height probably about as high as this right now, about maybe 10 feet. We're going to cut that down. I don't know the exact height, but it may be like 7 or 8 feet high in here, maybe less at the backside. Again, undetermined at this point. We know in concept that it's going to work and we can get some utilities down there. Next sheet is the exhibit AR10J. These are typical unit plans. Sheet number A10, revised date of 8/2/2017. The only thing that we did different on these unit plans is these didn't match the building plans before. They were too small, and they've been increased in size. So you see the 1 bedroom is 865 square feet. The 2 bedroom is 1,250 square feet. And again, these now match the building plans where they didn't before. This is one of those improvements that we did that wasn't on Beth's review memo. Last sheet is, actually the second to the last sheet, this is building area. It's exhibit AR10K, and it has a revision date of 8/2/2017. This exhibit just shows on each floor area, starting in the lower right, we have the ground floor. Moving up, we have the first floor, then the second floor, and then towards the left, we have the third and the fourth floor. And again, all this diagrammatically shows is the area for all these components of the building, and then they're totaled down in this little statistics chart. You can see there's some red clouds here. This is what Mike Dipple referenced earlier. There were some changes in the square footage, and the reason they changed was because of this amenity area that we added on the fourth floor up here. That added square footage to the building, so it threw all of our other calculations off, but everything is still in that acceptable range. Last exhibit we have here is the building height diagram, exhibit number AR10L, and it has a revised date of 8/2/2017. And what this exhibit does, you'll see in the center is the Enclave building, and then on either side there are buildings that are nearby, and what they do is we relate their height to the Enclave building. The code definition puts our height at 54 feet 11 inches or 54.92 feet. And that represents, if you go to the top of that light gray, that's where that dimension is measured to. And again, that's established from an imaginary plane, the grade plane, that is calculated by figuring points around the building perimeter. And I think Mike Dipple did that with Beth McManus, and I think we're all okay with that calculation now. Earlier, I think back in 2014 when we were presenting this earlier, many of the board members said we're we don't understand what the real height is. We measure height just like anybody else would from the sidewalk. So what we've done is we've taken these different segments of the building facade and put heights on each one of those from the sidewalk. And you can see how they can compare to the buildings next to it. And most all cases, we're, at least as far as 263 Franklin Avenue and the Cottage Place building are concerned, we're below, well below those. So with that, I would wrap up my testimony, and if anybody has any questions, I would entertain them now. Just going back to our original goals, I think we've done a nice-looking building. I think it fits well within Ridgewood. I think it meets a housing need, and I think it looks nice and something we can all be proud of. So.
As long as you want to go, it's okay with me.
We're going to carry the cross-examination to the next meeting, just with the, considering the time. And so I guess it's scheduled for September 19 is the return date. So we'll ask questions at that time, so everyone should review the exhibits that were provided. And I guess it's carried without prejudice to the board.
That's
and
correct.
Without further notice.
That is correct, and thank you. We prefer not to have to notice, but we certainly understand. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So this matter is carried to September 19, 2017, and we'll pick up with the architect, Bruce Engelbaum, at that time for cross-examination by the board.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate your
Bernard. Have a
time.
good night. Thank you, Mr. Engelbaum.
Thank you.
Good job, Bruce.
Our next item we have are minutes, September 6th and September 20th.
When was this carried to? September what?
Took me forever to do. 40 some.
Not back to school.
Okay. For those that were present at the September 6th meeting, just take a look at the minutes provided in front of you for September 6th, review them if there's any comments, corrections, or revisions. They are a rather lengthy transcript, so I assume this. Does anyone want to make a motion to accept the minutes of September 6th?
Did this say I wasn't here on the September 6th meeting? Because I was. Yeah, I think.
I didn't have an issue.
I'll make a motion to approve the September 6, 2016 minutes as submitted.
Wait, I think it says I wasn't here, but I think I was here.
Subject to amendment.
Subject to amendment, then, sure.
Second.
Okay, Joel seconded. All right, call the roll, Michael.
Mayor Knutson,
Yes.
Mr. Joel,
Yes.
Councilman Voigt,
Yes.
Mr. Schreibner,
Yes.
Mr. Torrielli.
Yes.
Okay, the minutes are accepted as submitted for September 6th. September 20th minutes, please take a moment to review. Do I hear a motion on the September 20, 2016 minutes?
Motion.
Okay, Jeff has moved the motion. Do I hear? Second is Joel. All right, Michael, call the roll to accept the minutes.
Mr. Joel?
Yes.
Mayor Knutson?
Yes.
Councilman Voigt?
Yes.
Mr. Torrielli?
Yes.
Ms. McWilliams?
Yes.
Mr. Scheibner?
Yes.
Do we have two different people
Okay,
here?
the minutes
Yes,
are
Scheibner and
accepted as
Scheibner.
submitted. Okay. All right, is there a need for an executive session?
Oh, it's totally here for this.
Okay. Is there any further business anyone wants to present? Do I hear a motion to adjourn? Jeff made the motion, a second?
Second.
Joel, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, we're adjourned.